This is CineBack for the Fujifilm X-H2s and X-H2. It perfectly fits the form of the camera, works with 4 different camera cages from multiple different manufacturers, has a power switch that sends power from a V-mount battery plate to a set of D-tap connectors that can be used with a USB-C power delivery to go into the camera, as well as the ability to power multiple devices. It is compatible with and without the fan unit with these replaceable plates. The D-tap plate can be rotated for sending power cables forward or backward. It has a power switch to control power to the entire rig. Giant plates for the top and bottom of the camera for mounting to really any accessory. And all of the buttons and dials are completely accessible all around the camera rig. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up rig, power, and use CineBack with the X-H2s, including installation of multiple different cages. The CineBack for the X-H series cameras is going to work with 4 different camera cages, which we are really excited about. Check the product page for the exact models, but we have the SmallRig standard cage for the X-H series. We also have the Tilta cage, which is a fantastic, super strong option and doesn't require any shimming. Then we have the 8-sin cage, which is another fantastic, strong option. And finally, we've even included the wooden camera cage for the X-H2 and X-H2s. All of these are compatible, and you'll be using various spacers depending on the cage that you want to install. Now let's talk about what comes in the box. Of course, we're going to have the actual CineBack body itself, along with a bunch of hardware, tools, and some spacers and a side plate. We've got 2 Allen keys, 2 large black screws, 3 smaller black screws, 2 1/4 20 to 3/8 adapters, 4 small silver rig screws, 3 different spacers depending on the cage you're going to use for the camera, and finally a custom side plate that replaces the larger one that's normally installed if you're going to use the fan module with the camera. Now let's talk about power options for the X-H2s CineBack. This camera, the X-H2s, is very interesting in that if I flip things over, you can see we have a battery door here, but we have no way to get a dummy battery in there and close the door fully. So a great way to go about powering this camera with CineBack is with USB-C power delivery. Traditionally, we have been recommending something like this, a D-tap to USB-C power delivery adapter. This particular one is from Condor Blue. Here is another one that just has a female connection instead of a male cable built in, and these still totally work just fine. Since then, however, we now have a unit that we sell on our store and is compatible with CineBack. So here is the unit itself. It's just a small D-tap on one end to USB-C power delivery, has an LED as well as voltage information on a label, and this is available now on the store. And separately, you can also purchase a right angle to right angle USB-C for power delivery and data. Now there are several different ways to rig this up. If you're using the fan unit like I am here, you can see the fan down in there behind the camera. It's a little tricky because there's not a lot of room. We made this version of CineBack very, very compact to give you as much weight options for batteries and lenses as you see here. So you're going to have to route this a little differently. So here you can see we have it attached to the top using that 3M dual lock system. So we've got D-tap going into there, cable coming out, going through CineBack, the other side, out the other side to the camera itself. So there's several different ways to rig this up. Here is another configuration where we are not using the Fujifilm fan. We have added the longer cover plate on the side, and there's plenty of room for all kinds of stuff. You can see we've got that D-tap to USB-C connector, an adapter for power installed with a cable nice and tidily coming out and up into the camera. So this is a super, super clean setup. So we can simply grab a battery, install it, turn on the switch, and once the camera's on, we're good to go. We've got power delivery. Everything is hunky-dory. So a couple different options. It's a little tricky with that fan in there, but without the fan, it easily accommodates a lot more cable management inside. And here's another configuration where we have the unit down here velcroed to the side of CineBack, and we've got power going out of the D-tap connector. The USB-C cable is going through the side of the CineBack, out the other side, and from the bottom this time into the camera for a nice compact setup. So several different ways to run this and several different ways to mount it to CineBack for the X-H2s. Finally, if you have a battery that has connections like this one does from SmallRig, you can use a USB-C right angle cable like you see here with a Mondo tie or something similar to go into your camera. So this is a very clean setup. The only downside is if I need to change out batteries, I do need to disconnect this cable up here, but it's another clean option to get power into the camera and keep all of your DTAPs available and the switch for other gear like monitors. Now, if you're going to be installing a camera cage with the fan from Fujifilm, I would recommend, if you're going to also be using one of these DTAP to power delivery solutions, which we'll talk about in the power section, installing your right angle USB-C cable, which is available on our store, before you install the camera. Because this fan makes things so snug and tight inside of CineBack, because we were able to get it pretty tight on this unit, it's just easier to have the cable installed than the camera. Then you can either run the cable down low or up high, but you can move it around more easily. If you're not using the fan from Fujifilm, you'll be able to install this much more easily. And before we install the camera into the cage and then into CineBack, we need to figure out if we're going to be using the fan module from Fujifilm. So if you're going to be using this with your camera, there's one thing you need to do before using CineBack, and that is to remove this plate here and replace it with this one, which has a cutout for the fan module. Out of the box, it's going to look like this with this longer side plate. And if you're not going to be using the fan module, you don't have to do anything. But if you are going to be using the fan module, go ahead and grab a Phillips head screwdriver and remove these two screws here. With that removed, we can go ahead and grab the shorter fan module, slide that in place, and then reinstall those two screws. Now we can set aside the larger plate, and for the rest of this video, I will be using the fan with the camera and cages just to give you an idea of what that looks like. So I'm gonna go ahead and install that, and then we will move on to installing our various cages. Now let's go ahead and install the camera using the Tilta cage. So I already have the Tilta cage installed. We have our fan module installed. If you don't have the fan module installed, make sure you flip out the screen before we install it into CineBack. An installation of this cage is super straightforward. We're going to simply line up the top and bottom plate of CineBack and slide the cage in between them. If you feel you need to pull up slightly on this top plate, that is completely fine and normal. We're going to line up the two threads of the cage through these two slots here, and we're going to use 2 of the 3 small black screws to bolt it down, but I'm not going to tighten it all the way. Okay, I've got those loosely installed. I'm going to flip CineBack upside down, and we'll install one last small black screw in the bottom in this center slot here. And then with that almost all the way tight, I'm going to flip everything over and close the camera screen. And we're going to check for alignment. If the camera display here doesn't look like it's parallel with these protectors on the side plate, we can actually slide the camera forward and backward to fix that alignment. If everything looks good, you can go ahead and tighten up those 3 screws. And if everything looks good here, we are done. So that is installing the Tilta cage with the X-H2s into CineBack. Now let's get CineBack installed with the SmallRig cage. So now I have the SmallRig cage installed, also have the fan installed if you're going to use that, and the screen is flipped out. We have CineBack here, and it's the similar procedure to the last cage, but this time we need to use a couple additional pieces of hardware. So to make this as compatible as possible with different cages, we use these little spacers. So grab the spacer that has a D on it, and we're going to install this on the bottom of the top plate on CineBack. So let me go ahead and install that, and we're going to be using 2 of the small silver screws that come with CineBack. And here's what things look like installed. So you'll notice that these 2 holes line up with these 2 slots on the top of CineBack, and it should be roughly flush with the front of the top plate. At this point, we can take the camera cage and slide it in, making sure the camera screen is flipped out, and we're going to line up the top 2 holes of the cage with those 2 slots and 2 holes in our spacer. Now we can use 2 of the longer screws for the top of CineBack and the smaller black screw for the bottom. I won't tighten these all the way down, but just loosely get them in, take CineBack, flip it upside down, and now we can install the small black screw right in the bottom center slot like this. This one I will tighten down. Then we can flip things over, close the camera screen, and check for alignment. If you feel that the screen is a little crooked compared to the parallel lines on CineBack, you can loosen the bottom screw and slide it forward and back to correct alignment. But if you're happy with alignment, go ahead and snug up all 3 screws. And just like that, we have CineBack and the SmallRig cage fully installed and ready to go out and shoot. Now let's dive into using the 8-cin cage with the X-H2s and CineBack. So the first thing you're going to need to do is install the cage. As you see here, I also have the fan module. If you flip things upside down, we are going to need to add one of our silver 1/4-20 to 3/8 adapters right here on the front 3/8 thread of the cage on the bottom. With that done, we can go ahead and take our CineBack, and we're going to need to add 2 spacers, the D spacer, as you can see here, and the G spacer. The D spacer is going to be installed on the bottom inside of CineBack. So that's going to go right there. And this slot that you see right in the middle of the spacer is going to line up with this slot right here on CineBack, with the arrow on the spacer facing forward. And I'll install that with 2 included silver screws. Here's what that looks like installed with our 2 silver screws. The arrow is facing forward, and this center slot here lines up with the center slot on the bottom plate. Next, we have the G plate. I'm going to use 2 more silver screws, and we're going to install that in the inside on the top plate this time. And here's what that looks like installed with the silver screws. We've got the arrow facing forward. It's a little behind the plate here, so it's not fully flush. And these 2 holes here and here line up with the top slots of CineBack here and here. Next, we can install the camera. We're going to flip the screen out, and normally we would install straight into CineBack, but because the top of this cage is actually a little bit lower than the cold shoe or hot shoe of the camera, we need to come in from the side slightly. So we're going to make sure that the hot shoe and eyepiece is behind the adapters here, and you can see I'm just going to slide it in, and then once we're in sideways, I'm going to push the cage back. And now we can line up the top 2 holes through the slots here in CineBack, through the spacer, and into the cage. For the top, we're going to use 2 of the longer screws. I'll go ahead and install those, but I'm not going to fully snug them in. And now for the bottom, we're going to use another one of those 1/2-inch screws. If you're some of the first purchasers, you might find this in a separate baggie because we made a design change last minute. So search your box and make sure you find that last screw. And I'm going to go ahead and install that through the plate, through our spacer, and into that 3/8 adapter we installed earlier. Now we can flip things onto the side, and we'll close the camera screen. Now, if the screen looks a little wacky or like it's not perfectly parallel with CineBack, you can go ahead and loosen that bottom screw and slide it forward and back until things are nicely aligned, and then tighten it back up. And with that done, we now have the 8-cin cage and the X-H2s fully installed. This is one of the more compact ways to configure your CineBack for the X-H2s if you go with this cage. And when it comes time to remove the 8-cin cage, you will want to remove all 3 screws, of course, and then pull the screen out as you see here. And remember that we want to go forward a little bit and then pull it out on the side so that you don't scrape up the top of the camera. All right, next up is going to be the wooden camera cage for the X-H2s and X-H2. I've got it installed here, and the fan mount is also currently installed. You want to make sure you flip the screen out, and we're going to get this thing set up with CineBack. To do that, we're going to need a spacer. Here's what that spacer looks like. It has an H, and we're going to use 2 silver rig screws to get that installed on CineBack. And we're going to be installing that on the bottom inside plate of CineBack, and we're going to do that just like this. So I'll go ahead and install it and give you a closer look. And here's what that looks like installed. I've got those 2 silver screws going through the plate into CineBack. And there's also this center slot, which is lining up with the bottom center slot on CineBack. So let's go ahead and install the camera cage, which is going to require 2 3/8 to 1/4-20 adapters. They look like this, and we're going to be installing them in this 3/8 thread and this 3/8 thread on the front of the cage. I like to start by threading these in by hand and then using a screwdriver, and we want this to be nice and flush. So nice and flush with the top of the cage, and now we're ready to go ahead and install things. So take the camera and cage and slide it in place. You may feel like it works best to go from the side with this cage, and if you feel like you have to slightly lift up the top plate on CineBack, that is completely fine and normal. Once you get it centered, slide it back until you see those two silver adapter threads there, and now we can center it. We're going to take two of our shorter black screws and install them in the top. I like to put my index finger on the bottom of those silver threads that we installed earlier so that they don't, as we tighten the screw, go further down. We want them to kind of stay in place. So that's pretty good right there. I won't fully snug that up just yet. I'll do the same on the other side. Again, I'm holding that silver adapter thread from underneath so that as I tighten the screw, I'm not threading the whole thing down and out of the cage. So with that done, we're going to flip CineBack upside down. And I'm going to take one of our longer screws and go ahead and install that through the bottom center channel right here and into the camera cage. And I will snug that up. We'll flip things onto the side. I'll close the camera screen and we'll take a look at alignment. If it looks aligned, great. If the screen looks like a little funky on the camera looks like it's not parallel with CineBack, you can loosen the bottom screw and slide it forward or back to get alignment just right. But if everything looks good, we can go ahead and make sure the top is centered, and then we'll tighten up those top two screws. And with that, we now have the wooden camera cage with the X-H2s installed and ready to go out and film. So that is CineBack for the X-H2 and X-H2s, available now at camerafoundry.com. You can learn more over there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you in our next Camera Foundry product video.